Well, Happy New Year, everybody. On to the virtual table. We're going to start off with, if I can get this thing to move. There we go. Okay. So continuing on the theme of ascomycetes and rusts, Annie Weissman found this recently on Smilax, which is like your green briar. And since this is a little closer, I just zoomed into that same picture. So it's not the best picture, but you kind of get more of an idea and think about what Megan was just showing. But since Megan is more of an expert at this, I asked her to chime in if she has something to say about these guys. Go ahead.
Yeah, so this is a rust, and these are teleospores. From these, you will form a basidium where the spores will be coming out. So that's how they're basidiomycetes and how they're related to mushrooms. They produce these sort of asexual spores, the Uridinia spores, and these teleospores as well. And rusts are absolutely beautiful.
So is this one here that's single? What's the difference between the single one and these double ones?
So rusts form 5 different spore types, and these are 2 of them. So these Uridinia spores are asexual. The teleospores are another spore type. These are 1N, so they're haploid. But from here, you will have the formation of a basidium, and then the basidiospores will be formed out of that.
Cool. So that's Pyxinion smilaxis. And she also found this guy growing on rubus, which is kind of like your blackberry, raspberry, wineberry, that kind of thing. Little closer, you can kind of see the pustules forming here, and these are some that have ruptured already. And here's the microscopic photos. Looks like this is Phragmidium violaceum.
Yeah, and these are more Uridinia spores. The Phragmidium, which are on Rosaceae and on roses, produce these really beautiful teleospores with multiple cells. They're long and look like little stacked. They sort of like stacked milk duds with an appendage on the bottom. But these are the asexual spores.
Cool. Well, thank you, Megan, and thanks, Annie. Those are some nice photos on your microscope there. Moving on, John Harper found this in Maryland. And if you remember, I think the past 2 table IDs, we've talked about this same mushroom. You can see here, it's got this almost orange brown coloration. These are a bit younger, so they tend to be kind of viscid and kind of a little tacky, sticky when you first find them like this. They can kind of get a little duller as they age. You can see the underside here. This is Flammulina velutipes, the velvet shank, or Enoki, and these grow differently in the wild than they do when you find them in the store, just because they put collars on them to trap the CO2, so they keep reaching. You get those elongated stems and little caps. Now, once they start getting a little bit older, you can't really tell here. I've actually got a little closer in here, and you can see, if you look close, this one is beginning to turn dark. These have a white spore print. These tend to like cold weather. You can see that there's kind of like a notch. They're still kind of attached to the stipe, but there is a notch before it gets there. And that's something to kind of keep an eye open for, because if you're hunting and you find those, you want to make sure you don't find don't put these in your pot. So John found these as well. And these are Galerina marginata, the Deadly Galerina. You can see as they get older, they might start turning that almost kind of orangey brown coloration. They tend to usually stay a little more drab. These do have a ring where the Flammulina do not. And you can see here, without even having to take a spore print, this ring has started catching the spores falling from these gills. And you can see it's got kind of a brown, rusty brown spore print. They also don't really have that kind of notch that you typically see in the Flammulina. And so if you're new, well, Flammulina is one, takes some getting to know, and make sure you know this too if you ever want to try and eat the Flammulina. Because you do not want to eat these because they do have amatoxins that are the same as you could find in the deadly Amanitas. Both growing on wood, by the way. Another one growing on wood that can have a little bit of a resemblance to Galerina autumnale or marginata are the brick caps. So this is Hyphilum alataricium. These are a little older, getting kind of beat up. They can be why they call them brick tops because they can be quite red on the top. These are probably getting a little older, and so they're turning more of a brown coloration. You'll notice in this photo, gills have this kind of dark purplish color. This is actually the spores, and they are falling here on the stipe here. So these actually have a dark purplish spore print. So that's another way you can distinguish them between Galerina marginata. These are edible as well. Yes.
Mitch, one of the things you might not have noticed in this photo is right underneath the second one at the on the right-hand side was another cap, and that was covered with the spores. And so it does show that.
Is that right there?
Color. Yes.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. And here too, you can see some spores dropping on the cap of the one that I guess this was below it. So it, there are ways you can kind of, if you keep a keen eye, you can kind of see where the spores have dropped. Sometimes you'll find clusters of something like a Armillaria tubescens or something, and they'll just be white underneath, and you're like, oh man, what is all that? It looks like somebody dusted it with flour. It's actually the spores. Another one that can do something like that is Ganoderma applinatum, and it can produce so many spores, and they kind of waft over and land on the top. It looks dusted with chocolate or something. All right, so submitted by Jeremy George, found this in Newtown Neck State Park. He's talking about this little guy right here. I did happen to notice there was some Biscognioxia right there. That was the bane of my cultivation at one point, kept attacking my logs and the squirrels pulled the bark off. Anyway, I'm digressing. So zooming in a little closer, you can see white mushroom, white stipe. It's got free gills, so the gills don't attach to the stipe. It's got a skirt-like ring on the stipe. It's got a bulbous base. Can't really tell if there's a vulva sac there, but this may be part of it, and it's just hard to see. Photo ID is just innately not as accurate. If we had this in your hands, you might be able to actually see and go, oh yeah, look, that's actually the vulva sac. It's just kind of connected with the stipe there. So anyway, this looks like this is one of those Amanita bisporigera group destroying angel. I'm putting group because you can't really be sure. There's a few of them around, but you certainly don't want to mess with pure white mushrooms. This would have a white spore print. This does have deadly toxins, the amatoxins, and they'll mess you up. They go for the liver. They stop RNA synthesis or inhibit an enzyme that an RNA synthase 2 or something like that. So it kind of stops protein production in your cells. Not a fun thing to eat and have to deal with. All right, another one by Jeremy George, same place, but look at that beautiful tree. It's so massive. And the mushroom is actually over here next to the backpack. Looks like there's a little piece popping out right here. And you can see how big this thing is. It looked tiny next to that backpack, but you can see he's got his foot right here. That tree is massive. So this is, I believe, Inonotus dryadeus. They call it the Warted Oak Polypore, and you can see up here, it has some resin droplets kind of forming on the cap surface there. And that's pretty typical of it. I believe this is kind of parasitic. I know we've seen these on trees and they are not around much longer after that, which is kind of sad because that's a beautiful big old tree. It'd be sad to see it go down. if you guys were ever with us at the Kensington Park Library, there used to be a big oak tree out there. And we saw this stuff flushing all up under it. And maybe 2 years later, they had to cut it down. Anyway, I'm not certain that that's the case. It's more circumstantial, but I believe it may be parasitic. All right, April Wyman found this in Pennsylvania, and being this is kind of a boring mushroom, you guys may recognize this. We see it all the time, but look at the colors on that thing. I asked her if these happen to be kind of slimy, and she didn't say any. She didn't respond back as of yet, but it doesn't look slimy to me. It almost looks velvety, and I think that might just be a different algae growing in there. Instead of, usually when you see the algae growing in there, it's more or less dark green. And so I suspect this just may be like a golden yellow algae growing in it instead of that green one, because it doesn't look like a slime mold. Sometimes when you're out hunting, you might see slime molds attacking oyster mushrooms or these. I've seen them on dryad saddle as well, and they'll just take over the whole thing. But anyway, I think that's just an algae in there. This is actually Trametes gibbosa. I'm sure you guys have seen it. I know we've had it on the table ID in the past. And she did get a really nice shot of the pores. And so you can see that they're elongated, not quite maze-like, but certainly not circular. No staining if you were to scratch this. Very common, usually pretty white, but sometimes green. And like this one, a beautiful yellow color. Really cool. All right, April Thompson found this on Christmas Eve. And I think we've had this in most of our table IDs. I think most of you might be getting used to seeing these and know what this is. This is your Pleurotus ostreatus oyster mushrooms. This is a nice dark sample of one. This is more like your winter oyster. They tend to be a little hardier, a little firmer flesh, darker brown like this. And Chris Bowen found these New Year's Day. So another batch of oyster mushrooms, probably the first flush of oysters in the new year. And you can see there it was raining then. Very similar, growing from wood, decurrent gills. Anyway, we've seen oyster mushrooms quite a bit. All right. So Elizabeth Hargraves found this in Florida, where she is now. This was found in dung, and this is one of many different Cuprinellus, Cuprinopsis. I wouldn't venture to put an actual name on it because there's so many, and a lot of them you're going to need microscopic features. Somebody that might be more versed in distinguish them might be able to do a little, get a little closer macroscopically, but I tend to just kind of group these into Cuprinellus, Cuprinopsis. It's one of the inky caps. It looks like this one may be more like the disseminatus type, where it's doesn't necessarily deliquesce like your Cuprinus comatus. All right. This is another one she found out in Florida, and you can see the dung in this picture. And right here, you can actually kind of see some spores. I thought this was kind of cool too. It looks like there's a spider web down here with lots of dew drops on it. It's pretty cool. And when she's picked this one and turned them over, you can see, okay, it's got a ring. It's got kind of mottled gills, and the ring is starting to get collect those spores on it. And here you kind of see a greenish blue coloration happening here. And she had the peace of mind to put it down and take an actual spore print. And so you got this dark, kind of purpley spore print. And you can see with age, this blue coloration has gotten even darker and more pronounced. In this genus, that would indicate that this does contain active psychedelic alkaloids. This is, I believe, Psilocybe cubensis, or what they call magic mushrooms. So, and that's its preferred substrate is herbivore dung. I've heard more cow, but that looks kind of like horse poop. So I mean, they're still herbivores. Anyway, that's kind of cool. All right, so she also found this one in Florida. I'm guessing, is that dung as well? It kind of looked like,
Yep.
yeah.
It's all horse dung.
Okay. And it does have beautiful dewdrops glistening on it. And she suggested the name Phycomyces, and I kind of looked it up, and that is the filamentous type of fungi. They don't grow mushrooms per se, but I'm not sure I could give you much more information about that one. But still, it looks cool. And continuing in that theme, Matt Cohen found this other really cool furry thing down in Florida. So this is Hexagonia hydnoides, and you can see it's got this extremely fuzzy top on it. It's got slightly angular pores that are relatively deep, but the fuzz on this thing is just amazing. In fact, I kind of threw in a zoomed in, and if this common name of this isn't the bearded polypore, I don't know what's wrong. This has got to be the bearded polypore, right? Anyway, that's a really cool find. Going even further south, Tom McCoy was down in Panama and found this guy. There is a similar looking fungi that came to mind when I saw this, and Sarcoscypha occidentalis, which I pulled this one from the internet. Thanks, Renee Leboeuf, for having that out there. And you can see it kind of has a similarity. And when I looked this one, well, Tom had suggested a name for it, but I looked it up, and it is actually in the Sarcoscypha family. So, and this is Coccinea speciosa. He also, in his research, mentioned that the indigenous folks in Malaysia will use this as a bait when they're fishing. So they'll actually kind of rub it on there, and I guess it imparts some sort of aroma or scent to there when they're fishing, which I thought was kind of cool. He also submitted this. This is the Dracula orchid. He found this in Ecuador, I believe. And if you noticed Elizabeth's notes, he'll be talking about orchids in March. So not necessarily a fungi, but certainly an obligatory, it definitely needs the fungi in order for its life cycle to be completed. So they are very associated with and reliant on fungi to be alive, actually. All right, well, Happy New Year, everybody. This John Harper submitted this one, just kind of showing the differences between Linzites betulinum and turkey tail, Trametes versicolor. You can see this is the gilled polypore. It can kind of look similar with that zonation on the top. And this is more of a not very deep pores, but it kind of has like a sandpapery feel, whereas this has those elongated pores, which look like gills. Anyway, thank you for the submissions, and you can send your photos. And I'll send out, I know I've said this last time, I'm going to send out a notification of where and how and what you should do to send photos. And I'll get that out before the next meeting. I know there probably won't be many to find out there, but we'll see what we can do. And thanks.
Thanks, Mitch. That was awesome as always. So fun to see what people are finding even in the middle of winter, although some of us are cheating. But I'll pass it back over to John to introduce our next speaker.